Without further ado, though, I wanted to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Peter Wilf. This is very exciting to have Peter in visiting tonight and sharing some of his research. Dr. Wilf is a professor of geosciences at Pennsylvania State University and a research associate at the National Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian Institution. Dr. Wilf earned his PhD in the Department of Geology at the University of Pennsylvania in 1998, and then started at his current institution in 2002. Dr. Wilf is a paleobotanist who uses fossil plants to investigate ancient ecosystems, better understand long-term patterns in biogeography, and gain insights into the evolution and extinction of plant species, as well as their ecological interactions with insects and other organisms. And I think these deep time perspectives are a really valuable sort of expansion and extension of the things that many of us think about day to day, looking at and working with present day plants. And we don't often spend enough time considering the very deep and long histories of many of the species and plant communities that we know and love. And this is sort of an exciting opportunity to have a leading paleobotanist in tonight to share some of his research, and certainly adding some valuable perspectives to the way we think about plants and plant communities. Dr. Wilf's primary areas of research in terms of study locations are working with the fossil floras found in southern Argentina, Southeast Asia, and the western interior United States. Dr. Wilf has authored or co-authored over 100 scientific publications in journals like the Botanical Journal of the Linnean Society, the New Phytologist, International Journal of Plant Sciences, the American Journal of Botany, Annual Review of Ecology, Evolution, and Systematics, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and Science. And he was the co-author of a really exciting review paper that came out last year in New Phytologist, where he and co-authors coined the term the angiosperm terrestrial revolution, which is this sort of exciting new way of considering the rise of angiosperms and their dominance of many of the terrestrial ecosystems we see around us today. So it's thrilling to have Dr. Wilf here tonight. He's also been a fellow of the Geological Society of America and the Paleontological Society. And we're thrilled to have him here tonight to share some of his research on the origins and paleoconservation of Southeast Asian rainforests, and to share some perspective on how paleobotany and deep time perspectives can sort of enhance and inform our appreciation of plants and the flora we see around us today. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Wilf for his talk on the origins and paleoconservation of Southeast Asian rainforests. And Dr. Wilf can start sharing his screen.
Thank you, Jesse, and Sarah, Melissa, for having me for that really nice introduction. So it's so nice to be here. You know, when I did hit 100 peer-reviewed papers, I thought of having a party, and I thought, that might not go over very well, but maybe this could be it. So anyway, here's the next several hundred papers for all of us, right? And so we're just here to have some fun, talk about the past. As Jesse said, the past is key to the present, and the present is also key to the past. So I'm going to give you sort of a cross-section of just some highlights of sort of a large, sprawling research project called Origins and Paleoconservation of Southeast Asian Rainforests. But since I am a card-carrying geologist, I wanted to start off just to give you a little bit of the things that go on inside my brain to sort of get you thinking about fossils. So this is a part that won't be on the test at all. I just want to start with sort of the fundamental things here. People need fossils, but fossils inspire. And as you can see that here, this is the opening day of the Smithsonian's incredible Deep Time Hall just a few years ago. This is the very moment before it opened, when the Carboniferous coal forest giant curtain was just about to go up. And the very first donor to the exhibit was a little kid who had given money from his shoebox, and he got to be the very first one to go in. So fossils inspire, but they're much more than that. Fossils are the only hard evidence of the history of life. So they tell us where we've come from and why we're here and what is around us and why it's here. And they tell us a little bit about where we're going. You can never predict the future, but you can be informed about the future and have a better future. So it's a little bit schizophrenic to sort of everything I look at, I'm always looking at a rock or a plant inside a rock. And, you know, thinking about the past, thinking about the present, thinking about the future, it gets to be a little much, but it's incredibly enriching. So, you know, as a geologist, you know, we're thinking about not just fossils, but, you know, where they sit on the drama of Earth's history, the history of life. So on the left, you can see sort of an animation of Gondwana opening and closing back up again. You can see millions of years ago on the left. So we have to consider where on Earth our fossils are coming from and what the climate was like. And then we have to consider that life has had a lot of events. So on the right, you can see the 6 mass extinctions, including our present day one, right? Where large percentages of living things died and some of the causes for that. And, you know, you zoom in on any of these things and it just opens up. It's just like, it's just sort of an endless box inside a box of insights everywhere you look. So, you know, we can look at the broadest brush and then we can zoom in a little bit, right? So Jesse did mention this review paper on the angiosperm terrestrial revolution, where we sort of put together a lot of recent observations. But here you can sort of see at a very broad brush, you can see the rise of angiosperms. Here's our time scale at the bottom. And you can see the paleoglobes. We're thinking about the Earth. We're thinking about climate. This is sort of globally average Earth temperature through time. It has changed quite a lot, right? And then you can see the change from gymnosperm dominance during the time of the dinosaurs to angiosperm dominance after the dinosaurs. And we made this term angiosperm terrestrial revolution, not to represent the whole history of angiosperms, but to sort of represent this time period that trips a lot of people up. Because when angiosperms first appear, they're not dominating everything right away. So we think of those old dioramas where dinosaurs are walking around with magnolia and fig trees. That really wasn't what happened. It wasn't until the dinosaurs died out, apparently, that we got the first neotropical rainforests and the great diversity of life and a big change in ecology with much bigger seeds and fruits. As you can see over here, and here's an example of a giant legume pod from Colombia, discovered by Fabiani Herrera et al. So it's just one of the best paleobotany papers I think ever written, was just published last year, and it tied it's from a huge data set from Colombia of leaf fossils and pollen. And it's led by, I'm proud to say, my former master's student, Monica Carvalho, and Dr. Monica Carvalho, Carlos Jaramillo at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institution. It was in science that directly ties the dinosaur extinction to the rise of tropical rainforests. They seem to have happened together. It was just an amazing insight. So this world that we live in now, it's dominated by angiosperms. You know, that to a geologist, that it hasn't been that way all that long. It's been that way since the dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid 66 million years ago. So come to Penn State, I teach a class on the dinosaur extinctions. I teach a class on geobiology, and we sort of go through these broad scale patterns. But that's the angiosperm terrestrial revolution in a nutshell. From 100 to 50 million years ago, angiosperms went from being the most diverse plants 100 million years ago. They started about 135 million years ago or earlier, but 100 million years ago, they're leading in diversity, but they're not dominant. But 50 million years ago, they're dominant. And, you know, we have to think about that they're not, you know, they might have spent a lot of their history just being trampled by dinosaurs, not getting to become large trees because they're incumbent large trees. So going back to the opening day of Smithsonian Deep Time Hall, here is one of the greatest scientists I know, who is I'm lucky to say was my thesis advisor, and now one of my best friends, Dr. Scott Wing. He was one of the 3 scientists responsible for leading the Smithsonian's brand new $145 million Deep Time Fossil Hall, so which utterly consumed him, leading a team of 400 people for 8 years. But here he is showing off. So this is a little wall, and it shows Scott in modern day Wyoming in the winter, but the rocks are 50 million years old or so, out of those rocks come things like palm leaves and crocodiles. So really, this looked more like Florida, not like this, right? And there's the real Scott wing showing this off for the first time to everyone else. And here's the quote, which I think kind of summarizes: if you miss everything else and you don't know how to prepare for my test, just remember this: fossils show us how climate and ecosystems have changed in the past and how they might change in the future. And really, that's all that's the whole preamble. So now let's get back to, I just kind of want to get you thinking about fossils and thinking about time. So let's go somewhere else. I'm going to take you all over the place on this talk. So brace yourself. Make sure that passport is up to date. But we're actually going to start at the bottom of Mount Kinabalu in northern Borneo. We might end at the top, maybe, if we get that far. So I don't know if any of you have been to Mount Kinabalu, but it is one of the most, if you're a botanist, it is one of those places that you must go to, because it's one of the great biodiversity hotspots in the world. And it's also the only tall mountain between the Himalayas and New Guinea. So up here, it's over 14,000 feet. It was glaciated up here, even though you're in northern Borneo. And the plants here, when I look at this, I think, okay, there's the geology, why this mountain is here. It's from collisional tectonics and old ocean floor that got lifted up. And then you look at these plants, and it's such a mix of biogeographic history that it's just utterly insane. And this has been known for a long time. So there's papers from the 1890s discussing how this is a mix of Asian and Australian elements. Because there are things here like podocarp and Araucarian conifers that have their history in the Paleo-Antarctic. Those are of special interest to me, as you'll see. And there's 80 species of rhododendron from Asia, and you can see them together. The fauna, of course, is equally mind-blowing. And as you go up the mountain, sort of famously, the Gondwanan influence here starts to increase. So you're way up here, you're in a forest of almost all podocarps, Dacrydium, Dacrycarpus, and Myrtaceae, Leptospermum. So it's almost like you're walking from China to the Antarctic as you walk up this hill, which is quite a wonderful walk. So this is really just sort of I think going here, the amount of inspiration that I've gotten from this one place on Earth is just sort of off the charts. But this is also a highly endangered kind of a system. This is surrounded by cleared land. This is surrounded by agriculture. Even the park itself is losing land to agriculture. And of course, with climate change, this is the classic sky island, right? You have this hotspot of endemism. Where is it going to go? Okay, is it going to go to the top, and then what? So this is a project where I want to just. There are really a lot of people here. I can sort of mention them as I go along. It's sort of my acknowledgements. Hold on, you guys just moved. There we go. Got you back. Okay, so but the PIs right now this phase are Alejandra Gandolfo at Cornell, is a paleobotanist. I worked with her very closely, especially in Argentina, for more than 20 years. And Tomas Serre at Brown, who leads just an incredible computer vision lab. And just a whole lot of international and domestic collaborators, students, and institutions. I'll mention them as we go. Most of the funding has come from NSF. Whoever thinks NSF doesn't fund risky projects hasn't talked to me, because what I'm showing you today is a risky project. And they were all behind it. So NSF is just one of the crown jewels of American science. And if they turn down your proposal, send them another one, all right? Don't complain, send them another one, because it's incredible. You write a 15-page term paper and you get money to make your dreams come true, and you end it in again. So there's sort of one big question here. What are the contributions to Southeast Asian rainforest floras from different historical source areas? So the Southeast Asian rainforest is this amazing hodgepodge of different biogeographic influences. So we're taking two approaches to this. Unraveling the this is the number one is the Paleobotanical approach, which is mostly what we're doing. So we're looking at multinational fossils. So we're digging in Gondwana. We're going to be digging in India. That hasn't started yet, thanks COVID. Working in Eurasia, working in the Malay Archipelago itself. And then sort of the pie in the sky, but I think we're going to get there, is automated fossil leaf identification. We're developing a tool that will allow you to identify your fossil leaves on your cell phone. So that's where we're going. I think maybe sooner rather than later. That's sort of a long project. So if we look at Southeast Asia, this hot area in the red, there are a lot of charts that sort of give you the same message. Okay, it's this classic biogeographic puzzle, and it is the epicenter of the biodiversity crisis. So this is a red list change map for vertebrates, for example. And you get to see the darkest colors for extinction risk are right here at the western end of the Malay archipelago, Malaysia, Western Indonesia, and including especially Sumatra, Southern Borneo, are the areas that are most at risk. Now, I just threw this in right minutes before curtain time here, because people, you look at that on a map, you think, okay, that's a little red dot, right? But it's huge. And when you're in this part, when you're in Borneo, I mean, I've been in Brunei, Borneo, I've been in Indonesian Borneo, and I've been in Malaysian Borneo, and it's hard to believe they're the same country. You can go from dry scrub forest to montane tropical rainforest and coastal dipterocarp forest. But the area this takes up is just immense. So there, and then if you think about it, what we know about this place is that the biodiversity here is pretty much the same as the Amazon rainforest. And yet totally different, not totally different, but a lot of really different lineages. And if you combine that with the risk that this area has, it sort of supports my statement. This is ground zero of the biodiversity crisis. The amount of carbon that's being lost per year in all the world's tropical forests is more than all the tailpipe emissions of the world. So you could offset everybody's car by not cutting down tropical forests. So the global tree assessment, this just assess in the state of the world's trees. You can download this online. This is the official IUCN Red List operation. And I've become the only paleobotanist in the global tree assessment. So I am the fossil tree assessment paleoconservation person here. So I'm trying to live up to that title now, but 54% of the assessed Southeast Asian tree species are threatened. So this kind of underscores, there are threatened tree species all over the place, right? But if you look at this pie chart, one thing that really stands out is just how many tree species are assessed. It's just the diversity there is incredible. It takes a long time to do this. And I think, as we're just starting to learn about the biodiversity of Southeast Asia, and for good reason, we're made aware of what's happening in the Amazon, and deforestation there completely deserves our attention. But I think you're also aware as botanists that Southeast Asia has had devastating wildfires. Australia has as well. In Indonesia, this is mostly to clear land for palm oil plantations. It's land clearance of many types. Of course, this sickens people, and it also it destroys habitat, but it also does other things. If you take away the trees, then you lose transpiration, so you get heat islands, and that exacerbates that exacerbates global warming, for example. So, or it adds to the effect. And a lot of these areas are sensitive watersheds. So there's a lot at stake here. And can paleontology do anything about this? Well, obviously we can't solve this whole problem, but we can do something, right? Paleohistory is a powerful tool for conservation and education. And this is really true. If you look at the World Heritage Site criteria, the World Heritage Site criteria are written to accommodate actual fossil sites, places that have a lot of living evolutionary history. That's part of the UNESCO criteria, including the record of life, major stages of Earth history, outstanding examples representing ecological and biological processes. So the World Heritage Site values have been used to establish paleoparks, but also places like the Gondwana rainforests of Australia that have an outstanding number of ancient lineages that are hard to find anywhere else. And this example has been set all over the world. So many places have been conserved because they have living fossils or because they have actual fossils. So paleohistory really does have something to say, but it goes beyond that. I can sort of come back to that at the end of the talk. Now, if you look at the Southeast Asian rainforest, it actually has a really limited fossil record. It's very hard to find fossil plants in real rainforests, right, where the soils are 10 meters deep, and everything is either a forest or it's an agricultural field or it's a city. So you're limited to sort of excavations and stream cuts. So to give you an example of how we've done this, but the other thing about Southeast Asia is that it has assembled from so many places that we can study the kinds of plants that are now there by looking at places like India and Argentina. So this is a map of the world 50 million years ago, and these are maps of the world 150, 90 million, 45, 5 million years. And these are places that we're working or would be working if not for COVID, but we're off to a pretty good start. Superimposed roughly on the time period. So I'm going to start, believe it or not, in Argentina and spotlight that. The second spotlight will be on Brunei, where we've actually collected and published the first leaf flora from the Cenozoic of the whole Malay archipelago in the whole modern era. That just came out, so I want to get you through that today as well. But in brief, if you look on the left, 50 million years ago, we had the hothouse world. We had forested poles. We had the first primates and horses going across the Arctic. We had dawn redwood forests in the Canadian Arctic back then, Nothofagus southern beech forests in the southern hemisphere. So there was biotic interchange across the poles, right? And significantly, this hothouse coincided with the very, very end of Gondwana. So the old supercontinent from 700 million years ago still existed in the form of South America, Antarctica, and Australia, even 50 million years ago. After this time, Antarctica separates and we get the thermal isolation of Antarctica, as Ernest Shackleton found out, right? The circumpolar current thermally isolates it. Eventually, isn't that incredible that they found the Endurance? I'm still not over that. That's just, anything I'm telling you today is nothing compared to that. Wow. So we get the separation, and so before this happens, I'm going to show you the evidence. There's an ancient southern rainforest, not like a tropical rainforest, but sort of a temperate type rainforest all across the southern hemisphere. After this time, the conditions change in Patagonia. Antarctica obviously goes to the penguins, and Australia becomes the life raft. Australia zooms north and docks with Asia, pushes up New Guinea, initiates a tremendous volcanic arc that's Indonesia essentially, and this becomes the refuge as Australia itself dries out. The old rainforest lineages transfer to New Guinea and then make their way west, Sulawesi, Borneo, Sumatra, even into Myanmar, southern China, etc. So it's quite a dramatic story, this Australian life raft, because these lineages are not really doing anything but tracking their preferred environment, which is the sort of cool, wet rainforest. And they managed to do this for 50 million years, and now they're getting cut down in 100 years. So that's a message for today. Now, this other great collisional event is that India docks with Asia. India also came from Gondwana, but much earlier. So there's another interchange starting about 45 million years ago between India and Southeast Asia. So the Malaysian tropics, or Southeast Asian wet tropics, are completely unlike the other tropical zones. You have the Amazon and you have the Central African rainforest. These are places that are stable. They're on stable continents. There are plenty of places to go comparatively. There have not been massive collisions like Australia slamming into South America. That never happened. Australia left South America. It never slammed into it. So their history is very different. The history of Southeast Asia is this incredibly complex mash-up of collisions, and then more recently sea level rising and falling. Right. So before our current glaciation, this was all exposed as one extension of Southeast Asia called the Sunda Shelf. Unfortunately for the tree species that live there now, the modern day climate change and land clearing are happening at a high stand, which is making it much harder for plants and animals to exit, to find dispersal routes. The 25,000 islands that this area is now carved up into is making the extinction crisis much worse than it is for the Amazon, where it's plenty bad. Believe me, I certainly love the Amazon. So don't want to take anything away from there. So we're going to start, I'm going to sort of highlight our longest running, most successful project in Patagonia. I'm going to make the link across the Southern Hemisphere to Asia there. And then I'm going to flip on you and show you some much younger flores that are actually from Southeast Asia. So I'm going to give you the distant teleconnection and then a much more recent one. So 50 million years ago, Gondwana ends in a hothouse. Oh, sorry, this is where we've been working a lot. So the last kiss, sorry, Gustav Klimt, I couldn't help myself. But this is a geophysical reconstruction, South America, Antarctica. So this is sort of the last moment when before there was deep water. So until 52 million years ago, there's interchange. And we know that this is true because we see similar mammals in Antarctica and in Southern South America and similar plants. After this time, we really don't. After this time, this little tip of Antarctica starts to go east. And what's a little microbiosphere or Gondwanasphere supposed to do about that? Trying to go back and forth to see its aunt or something. So that's sort of the last moment. So we've been sort of our flagship site among many in Patagonia is from this last moment of Gondwana. Gondwana ends in a hothouse, and it's called Laguna de Unco. It's in Chubut province, Argentina. So we've been working there for quite a long time in collaboration with a small but incredibly effective museum called the MEF Museum, which is right here. So we don't have to go from Buenos Aires for 1,000 miles. We can get into the field in 8 hours. So you can sort of see the paradoxes of the museum. The MEF Museum's in Trelew, which is right here. Here's the Chubut River Valley, settled by Welsh settlers in the 1860s. This area, just amazing. And you can just kind of see all the temporal paradoxes that I live in every day, right? So we're digging up a fossil rainforest in the modern day steppe, right, where dominated by grasses and ctenopods. And then right over here is a temperate rainforest, one of the wettest places on Earth. But somehow the plants that we're digging up here have almost no relationship to the ones over here, even though they were once thought to. So how's that possible? Well, it's possible because all this stuff went extinct in 45 million years ago, and then the Southern Andes went up only 15 million years ago. That's how it happens. A million years is a long time, folks. So 30 million years is even longer. So you can kind of see the Pacific clouds just raining out like crazy on the west, and then you get the rain shadow, and then you're here digging up ancient plants. So you'll see some artwork by my spouse, Rebecca, where she's working on a children's book about exactly what I'm talking about today, which is maybe a much better way to present this. So this is Rebecca's drawing of what Laguna de Unco was 52 million years ago. It didn't look like a grassy steppe. It looked like something you'd see in Sumatra today or the Philippines, a big crater lake surrounded by volcanoes. So from some earlier iteration of the Pacific, of arc volcanism from the Pacific slamming into Pacific plates and Nazca plates slamming into South America. So there's a lake, it's acid, it's hot, almost nothing lives in it because it's just full of volcanic hydrothermal waters, but it's surrounded by this really lush rainforest. And the wind, the volcanic vents, and slope failures are all bringing in fossil material. And because this lake just seems to be completely sterile, nothing happens to it. It just sinks and it becomes amazing fossils, some of the best fossils I've ever seen. So something's going on there that is promoting fossilization really, really, really well. So this is what we're digging up. So we're digging this up, but it looks like this today, right? So, this is, in my career, this is the best place to collect fossils. And several agree with me in the world. So this is 1.3 kilometers of fossils here. So this blinding white, you've got to bring your sunglasses. These are the fossil lake beds. So maybe you've seen the fossil lake beds in the Green River Formation around Rifle, Colorado. So it looks a lot like that, but there's so many more fossils actually. And this is geology. So if you go sideways, you're moving in space. If you go up, you're going up in time. If you go down, you're going down in time. So we can sample with some spatial heterogeneity, and we can sample through time. The amount of time that's here is actually not very much. It's less than 1 million years, but still, and we have really good time resolution. because of volcanic ashes that we find. So there's a lot of exposure. This is actually a 30-kilometer wide fossil caldera. It's kind of like Yellowstone Lake. There are other places with fossils here. This is just the northernmost end. You can see these dark volcanic rocks. And so the lake is embedded in this, on the sinking floor of an ancient volcanic caldera, kind of like Yellowstone Lake. And then it filled in catastrophically with volcanic ash. So as you go up, it becomes almost entirely volcanic ash. So these rocks are full of insects, they're full of leaves, they have flowers. Once in a while you can find, well, you can find a lot of fish, catfish especially. And we've even found birds and turtles. So just to give you an idea, these are my colleagues, Marcelo Kraus, Mike Donovan, Liz Hayek. This is the one day we managed to fly a drone in the wind. This is just a one little area just to kind of show you up in the air what it looks like. So you can see why after 20 years, we are not done. How can we be done? And you have over 200 species of plants from this place. That's a lot for fossils. So this is one of the most biodiverse fossil sites in the world. There's our little access road there. It comes from our camp, which is just over the hill. Delightful place. The best colleagues to work there, always, from the MEF. So this is kind of showing, a climate chart for the last 70 million years. You can kind of see when I keep saying the early Eocene, 50 million years ago, was hot. So this shows the temperature at the bottom of the ocean, essentially. And you can see ever since it's been cooling. So it's paradoxically, we're worried about global warming, but as we should be, but it's because we evolved in this icehouse state that's actually completely uncharacteristic for Earth history. The amount of change in temperature that's projected under sort of business as usual scenarios is enough to flip us back into this strange world of the hothouse. So this is a sort of a stratigraphic section. This is several of them put together into one. This is being updated. You can see this is a little old now, but this is meters of rock. So there's 170 meters of rock there, 1.3 kilometers of exposure. And then this is where it is in the ancient world. And each one of these LHs is a hole in the ground. So we have now 31 of these holes in the ground where we collect the fossils. But then we can get important other information. The volcanic eruptions, which are happening continuously, are depositing really important minerals into the lake beds, which include sanidines and zircons. And we can use the radioactive decay clocks, the argon-argon clock and the sanidines, and completely independently in completely different labs, the uranium-lead clock in the zircons. And these are some of the most outstanding earth science labs, the ones that actually date the rocks. So we don't need molecular clocks. We know how old these rocks are. So, so right in the middle of the fossils is 52.22 million years. So we know exactly where we are. That's how old it is. And we have that same date. The uranium lead age is not published yet, but it's from the same rock, the same age. So we know how old these fossils are on this hill in Patagonia really well. We also know that the fossil caldera under the lake beds, we just published an age of 52.5. So sort of every fossil is between 52 and 52.5. So there's sort of like 500,000 years of fossils there, which is neat. And so for this hill in Patagonia, it could be correlated to anywhere in the world, the bottom of the ocean, to somebody's fossils in Wyoming, like mine. I'm everywhere. So, and we bring people from all over the world to this remote place. So this is a sheep shed where we camped one year, and we have people from 6 different countries eating lamb together, finding fossils. And we have a dinosaur crew here too, looking at older rocks, finding pterosaurs and dinosaurs over the hill in a different direction. Everything we're collecting is from after the dinosaurs died, right? 14 million years after. So yeah, there's really nothing like this experience. So here's a little video just to show you. A lot of what we're doing is very old style, right? We're slamming rocks with picks and shovels. So what we're actually doing is we're clearing away what we call the overburden. Sometimes the overburden is really hard, and we bring portable jackhammers to get it out. So these are two of the technicians from the MEF, Pablo Puerto, Leandro Canessa. So it was, it takes about 6 hours to dig a hole, just to dig out this really hard stuff. We're just trying to excavate this little layer that we call the pay layer. It's only about 8 centimeters thick that has a lot of the fossils in it. So it's one of those 31 localities. And then we celebrate for a minute. And then we start digging, right? And splitting the rocks. And that's where it gets really, really, really fun. And then all the fossils are deposited. We've been doing this all along. They're not here unless on loan from the Argentine government. The fossils are kept at the MEF Museum, Museo Paleontologico Egidio Ferruglio. This is a giant petrified stump right in front that was brought in with a helicopter. So this is a first class, small, but about to triple in size. They're doing an expansion right now. This is a powerhouse of a museum that started with a storefront. Its first version was about the size of a Dunkin' Donuts. And it's rapidly becoming one of the most important museums in all of South America. We have about 20,000 fossils there. About 8,000 of them are from this one site. So in the prep lab, we can prepare them out with the air tools. And we label them and photograph them, study them with the microscopes, figure out what they are, publish the species, publish the ecology, publish the biogeography, publish the insect image, and 1,000 theses were launched, which is how it should be. So before I go into the Asia connection, I have to mention, this is just one of the most fun things that we found, which is the fossil tomatillo. And we now have 2 species of this. So just take a look at this. So this is, you can see the pedestal. Here's some modern tomatillos from herbarium sheets, and the little tomato-like fruit on the inside. Well, you're a botanist. I don't need to explain this to you. So you have the little expanded calyx. Usually I have to explain this in incredible detail. Do you see this? Do you see that? But so what's happened here is that the berry, the little tomatillo part, has been compressed to coal, so that's why it's dark. And then the calyx has broken open here, so you can see the berry. And then you have the 5 lobes. And then we have 2 specimens of this. And I like to call this herbarium fossilization. You can actually learn a lot looking at herbarium sheets, because here's one of these lantern fruits that got pressed under an axis, and it looks exactly like the fossil because it was squished the same way. So we did the phylogenetic analysis. This really is a physalid, and the features are indistinguishable from living physalis. It depends what neighborhood of Philadelphia you come from. You call it Physalis, physalis. But Physalis, if you like. So it's identical to living physalis. We don't have the rest of the plant, but for sure this is very closely related. It's 52 million years old, which is 10 times older than physalis was thought to be based on molecular clocks. But let's not talk about that anymore. So let's go back to Southeast Asia. So this is quite a detour, right? I took you to South America. So what I'm going to tell you now is that a lot of the fossils we're finding, Physalis not being one of them, it's an American genus. So we're getting all kinds of biogeographic signals. But a lot of the survivors you can find in the Malay archipelago. These are all genera that we have found as fossils here that live now here. These are GBIF dots. A lot of them in New Guinea. For genera that we have published from Patagonia, to more than 10,000 kilometers away. So sort of the next segment of the talk is to show you that you can find the deep history, part of the deep history of the Malay archipelago rainforest can be found in Gondwana, right? So from Patagonia, Antarctica, Australia. So to understand the origin of the Southeast Asian rainforest, you need to go part of what you have to do is go here. Believe it or not, people find fossils in Antarctica, quite famously, and quite a lot of them. Okay, so if you don't believe me, here are the fossils. Right? So each one of these has been, well, almost all of them have been published. So so we have coachwoods, we have Casuarinaceae, Engelhardioid Junclandaceae. That was a shock. I almost didn't believe that myself. And Oricaria section Eutacta, and Todia related to in the Osmondaceae, which is in New Guinea, and Papua cedrus. That was an early shocker. These were thought to be Austrocedrus, these fossils, and we have the cones. And So these are actually Papuacegeris in South America. We have an extinct relative of Phyllocladus. A lot of these are the only South American occurrence of these genera ever, modern or fossil. Agathis, so we have actual cowrie, beautiful fossils from Argentina, Dacrycarpus, which is one of the podocarps. There's one with the male cone, and really shockingly, Castinopsis in the Fagaceae, which is the first southern hemisphere Fagaceae, and thousands of kilometers south of any other Fagaceae, living or fossil. So I'm just going to give you a quick highlight reel. Here's the Dacrycarpus. We published in 2012. It got on the cover of this journal, and but just amazing. We have like hundreds of these. Only one we have the pollen cones attached, but this is the one specimen that has the seed cones, and you can see the famous fleshy receptacle, the edible fleshy receptacle. These are bird dispersed, so that's telling you something. And the feather, we have the feather foliage and the scaly foliage, and these incredible seed cones. And then 100 more fossils, more than 100 more fossils, including pollen cones. So we go to Kinabalu over here, and there's our fossil sitting on the forest floor. Right? It's the same thing. But this, just to illustrate this, I put that one in the stream of my hair here, see it? And 16,000 kilometers modern distance from that fossil to this one in my hair. And that's not a very nice 16,000 kilometers if you're a tropical conifer, is it? You've got to go across the Southern Ocean and Antarctica and Western Australia. So this can only be understood in terms of Earth history. This makes no sense without geology and Earth history. But with that, it makes a whole lot of sense. So this was another one. This was the first Agathis cowrie. This is one of the most celebrated trees in the Southern Hemisphere. It might be the largest tree by volume in the world, certainly one of the largest. And a lot of you may know it from New Zealand, if you've been in the cowrie forest there, but the genus actually goes all the way to Sumatra. And a lot of these genera that I'm showing you also have fossil records in Australia, or New Zealand, if you look across the bottom. And we've now described Agathis back to a stem lineage species from the early Paleocene as well. So we don't need a molecular clock because we have a morphological clock. We have the stem group Agathis at 64 million, and we have the crown group Agathis here at 52. So you can see the wonderful axis with the scaly bud, the pollen cone here with the little spoon-shaped bracts, looks just like Agathis lenticula from Borneo. The cone scales with the little scalloped endaments, I don't know if you know the genus. And then this is really the kicker, and we're about to send, this always happens when you're about to send back a loan to Argentina. But let me just look for a seed again. How come we can't find the seeds? They're still sitting on the cone scale. Here's a modern one. The Agathis seeds have a big seed body, and they have a little rudimentary wing, and they have a big expanded wing. Then you start to look closely at this. There's a big seed body. It just happens to still be on the cone scale. It never dispersed. And you have the little rudimentary wing, and then the big expanded wing. And okay, so let's up the contrast. And then this, just to be sure, this is 70 microscope pictures stitched together, so you can really see exactly what's there. See the carbonized seed body, the rudimentary wing, and the expanded wing. So definitely, Agathis, 52 million years ago in South America, we've got that done. And then these are really important trees in the Asian rainforest and in New Zealand. They from a carbon point of view, their volume is preserving an immense amount of biomass, and then they'll have like hundreds of millions of grams of carbon tied up in leaf litter. And so these are trees that should not ever be chopped down if you're ever concerned about biodiversity or climate change in the future. They're just sitting on the carbon. They have the carbon, and they're supporting the ecosystem that maintains this. But a lot of these species are threatened. New Zealand has lost over 99%. So think of that carbon loss already, right? And here's another one that is pretty celebrated, I think. This is my close colleague, Alejandra Gandolfo at Cornell. He's been involved in everything. And so eucalyptus, you're botanists, eucalyptus is 600, 700 species, mostly in Australia, but also New Guinea, Indonesia, Philippines. So we have a lot of it it had never been found. The oldest fossil eucalyptus had been about 21 million years ago from Australia. And that still seems to be the oldest verified one. Then we found lots of eucalyptus in Patagonia. So these are the first and still the only eucalyptus outside of Australia. And they're 52 million years old, so they're like a lot older. And this is really, really not subtle. We have hundreds of the leaves. They have the little flammable oil glands in them. We have flowers with the pollen in them. We have flower buds. We have the incredible infructescences with the fruits. So it's actually a dominant species in this ancient caldera. In South America, eucalyptus. So we postulate that this eucalyptus today is colonizing lava flows in New Britain, places like that. It's a pioneer species, or it's living in disturbed areas. So you can start to imagine a mosaic where you have rainforests and then you have volcanic disturbance areas, just like you see in Hawaii, right? You have the rainforest and the patches of volcanic flows. This would be where the eucalyptus would have grown, hypothetically. And then here is Castanopsis. So this is a real shock. So this is Castanopsis cuspidata. I don't know if you know the genus is closely related to Castania, but it's a little bit like a quercus where the scaly cup goes over the acorn in terms of the fruit. It's really a short description of Castanopsis. Does anybody know where shiitake mushrooms comes from, what that name means? So take is the mushroom and shi is Castanopsis. So the shi tree is Castanopsis. So there's your connection if you like shiitake mushrooms. So this must have supported some amazing fungal communities, and the mycorrhizal communities on Castanopsis today are quite stunning. Here's one from Japan. My colleague Yusuke Onoda picked these up outside Kyoto University and just mailed me a big bag of them so I could take these pictures for the paper. But you can see it splitting open in a suture with a little acorn sticking out. So here's the fossil, here's the suture, here's the little acorn sticking out. Here are the little scales on the cup, see them? And then what you see here is one acorn. It's been carbonized, it's dark, and it's sticking out from the scaly cup. And then that's one of four. It's this one. It's one of four nuts on an infructescence. But I still didn't believe that. We stared at this for years. And then we had this other mystery where it had hundreds of leaves that sure looked like Fagaceae. Oops. These were described as Delaneaceae, tetracera. And they're not tetracera, but that took a little work. But then a few years later, we discovered the spike of more than 110 immature fruits right here. Look at this closely. Scaly cupule. Here's a modern Acuminatissima from New Guinea for comparison. It's got little tiny perianth lobes, very fugacious of it, and 3 styles, 3 punctiform styles. And here, scaly cup, 3 punctiform styles, little perianth lobes. Oh, look over here, little perianth lobes, 2 of the 3 styles. You can see by symmetry, there's one there. Oh, look over here, here's 3 styles. Look over here, 3 styles. Look over here, scaly cup. Look over here, 3 styles. So this really is Castanopsis. And we did the phyloanalysis to, some people still aren't convinced by this, but sometimes you have to wonder what it takes to convince people that gravity is real. I mean, these are Castanopsis, I'm sorry. And the leaves also match Castanopsis very nicely. So here's a little excerpt from the children's book. Okay, by looking at the fossils from the lake, the scientists begin to understand what Gunodolunco was like 50 million years ago. The fossil plants are not like the plants that grow in Patagonia today. Instead, they're more closely related to plants that grow in the mountains of Australia, New Guinea, and Southeast Asia. So when you have me back, I'm just going to read the children's book. We'll have story hour. It'll be much more fun than the version I'm doing. So let me just stop in at some of these other places. We're trying to put together a whole lot of floras from that pertain to this question of Southeast Asia. So I hope I've convinced you that by taking you to Argentina, I've actually shown you something about the Southeast Asian rainforest. If I've done that, I've done pretty well. And we can call it a day, but there's still more to tell you if you're willing. I actually don't even have a watch, and I'm sure I'm going over. So stop me anytime you want, really. I've sort of, I'm a professor, I could talk forever. That's how I get promoted. So in 2000, we made a field trip to Pakistan. Note the year. 1 year later, we could not have done this. We went to Balochistan, right along the Afghan border. And this is the early Eocene Gazette Formation. So we went with the Geological Survey of Pakistan. So this represents India sort of at the very first moments of collision. And here we are collecting at 110-degree heat. Our guards with the, you see the National Geographic with the guards with the automatic rifles accompanying paleontologists in Pakistan. We had those guys and we loved them. I wanted to take them home with me. I never felt so safe. They're asleep under rocks. They couldn't handle the heat. I don't know what we were doing, just losing our minds. But so we got about 300 fossils, and so we're reviving this now for the current project because it's important for the story of the India-Asia exchange. In 2014, with a different group of colleagues from the Bandung Institute of Technology in Java and Canadian and US colleagues, we went to Borneo, southern Borneo, to collect fossils, and Sumatra. And so we collected this, well, here's one example from early Oligocene, Tanjung Formation. This is probably a huge legume seed. So actually Castana spermum gets to be this size. So we're now, my student Eddie Spagnolo is now studying this. We're going to be CT scanning it and figuring it out. So this seems to be an important record. And so we have these two sites under study. But what a great time, right? Indonesia Day. And I got to say, nowhere have I been where more people wanted their picture taken with the giant, including the entire police force of Sabah Lunto. So, and I've also got to say, everywhere we go in the world, there are incredible people who help us. So in Pakistan, the poorest coal miners would invite us in to have tea in their little shacks in the middle of the day and get us out of the heat. In West Sumatra, I was even hotter because I'm at the bottom of a coal mine and I've got 100 pounds of rocks in my backpack. But we called this incredible fellow who would show up, who actually lived right there, who'd come down on his moped and drive the fossils up the hill for me. So around the world, there are people who've earned Penn State shirts, and he's one of them. And then right before COVID, we managed to pull off a trip to Vietnam, and right behind a brick factory with a team from the Xishuangbanna Tropical Garden in China, in Yunnan, and from the Hanoi Museum, which is the key coordinator of this project. We went to central Vietnam and we found the first fossil plants from southern Indochina on New Year's Eve. And this was so exciting that we worked into the night, cutting up the fossils with Chinese cleavers and trimming them and photographing them in the dark to the light of Venus and the moon. That's how exciting this was. We collected almost 600 of these fossils, and they have cuticles on them. So we can look at the epidermal structures, the stomata, the guard cells, and really get a good idea of what's going on with this. So one of your audience members tonight is my PhD student, Tengxiang Wang, who is doing this first PhD project. And Tengxiang has been making remarkable progress on this flora already. So you'll be seeing papers from this soon. And he's going to, if you're going to the Botany 2022, Tengxiang will be presenting something there. Okay, so now I'm going to shift sort of the second major fossil segment. Is actually from the Malay archipelago. As I told you, there are hardly any fossil plants known from there. So in 2015, we made a field trip to Brunei, and 7 years later, we published what we found. So this paper is out in PeerJ 2022. It embeds, why does this take 7 years? Well, do you like hanging out? The crocodile might be an answer. That's kind of distracting. So we collaborate here with the University of Brunei, Dar es Salaam, and other folks. And this embeds the entire senior honors thesis of my senior thesis student, Xiaoyu Zhou, whose dedication to paleontology is all the more remarkable because he's a geophysicist, and he's now a doctoral student in geophysics, which really, I don't know if you know geology, but that may as well be chemistry. Well, geology has chemistry too, what can I tell you? But it's pretty different. But he loves fossils because his grandfather was an engineer in the Qinghai and in Tibet long ago, and he collected vertebrate fossils all the time. And, so I think this inspired Xiaoyu to take on this project, and he worked for 3 years in my lab on these leaves. So what we have here is the first fossil leaf flores from Brunei, and what we have is the first fossil evidence that dipterocarps were dominant in Borneo, which they are today, by 5 million years ago. So there's some really neat older observations to bring in here. One of them, of course, is Wallace. Take a very brief water break. You may as well. It pays off to read this stuff, right? The Malay Archipelago. Wallace actually said this: the existence of extensive coal beds in Borneo and Sumatra of such recent origin that the leaves which abound in their shales are scarcely distinguishable from those of the forests which now cover the country. Oh my gosh, that's a testable hypothesis. Thank you, Alfred Russell. Okay, so that's from here, right? And then even before Wallace, there were the pioneer expeditions from Europe, especially from the Netherlands. So there's actually a monograph on leaves from Java from 1854, and it's beautiful. Look at this. And here's one from here, 1874, Sumatra. I've actually been to this place where the fish came from, and that sure looks like a dipterocarp. And then there's nothing. It stops. So we're kind of jumping into this void. Brunei, maybe some of you have been there. I really recommend it because it's the Borneo rainforest, and over half of it has still not been logged. So if you look on the right here from Brian et al., you can see that Brunei is mostly unlogged. And you compare that to Sabah and Sarawak from Malaysia. The government of Sarawak was well. I don't want to go into this. There were some environmental crimes, like real crimes, and over 90% of the forest has been cut down here. Now, fortunately, the current government seems much more interested in restoring the forest, so that's good. Yeah, Brunei is, when you're in it, it's an area about the size of Delaware, but when you're in it, it seems pretty big, and it still has a lot of intact rainforest on the north coast of Borneo. So Borneo, just for a quick refresher, is this island, almost as big as New Guinea, and it has 3 countries on it. So the seed plant flora is 3,500 species, 1,900 trees, 9 genera, and about 200 species of Southeast Asia's dominant life form, the dipterocarps. So I don't know how familiar you are with dipterocarps, but these are the dominant life form of Southeast Asia. They're the tallest trees. The tallest tropical trees are dipterocarps. They form the entire vertical structure of the forest. They provide tremendous pollination resources. They supply food through their seeds, their masting cycles to many vertebrates. Unfortunately, they're very economically lucrative and full of timber and resins. So they're threatened. So this just came out, the red list of Bornean endemic dipterocarps, Bartholomew et al. Borneo has over half of the dipterocarp species in the whole world. It has 267, 162 of those are endemic, and 62% of those are threatened with extinction. So this is just, you just see this over and over again, that the resource is really disappearing fast. We really can't sit around with this. And the dipterocarps, for good reason, are iconic in the biogeography of Southeast Asia, but the macrofossils are really rare. Most of what we know about dipterocarp history is from pollen and a little bit from wood. And so thank goodness we have these records, but if you look at dipterocarp pollen, it's never very abundant. This is from 23 to 3 million years ago in the Gulf of Thailand. You'd expect it to be like, most of the pollen to be dipterocarps. So dipterocarp pollen has a preservation problem, which is well known. This is a modern forest in India, and you can kind of see the pollen just dropping it from the top of the tree to the soil. So it's it's just very, very, very fragile. It gets compromised in air pollen. It's just, once it's done its job, if it doesn't get to do its job, it's gone. So it's very thin walled. It just doesn't have very much preservation potential. So what that means is these pollen records are incredibly important, but they're not really telling us when we had dipterocarp forests, which is, that's the iconic thing. When did this start? So this is where macrofossils can come in. Now, as I mentioned, the Asian tropics are not such an easy place to work compared to, say, Argentina. So we went in 2015, we looked at a lot of fossil sites. Brunei does have a lot of road cut exposures, beach exposures of rocks, quarry pits, and we just drove around and walked around a lot just looking for sites. So here are a bunch of places. This is from a different paper where this is essentially where we went. You can kind of see these are all coming from about 18 million years ago to like just a couple million years ago. And we found leaf fossils in just 2 places. So one of these is a reserve called Baracas Beach, which looks like this. And this looks like, oh, this looks like fun, collecting fossils on the beach. It is not. If you remember like a really hot day at the beach when you were really uncomfortable and you just wanted to go home. Now imagine that, and you're wearing like long pants, full field gear, a backpack full of rocks, and a heavy pickaxe, and you have to walk a mile back to the car with all of that. That's what it's like. So, but it's worth it, right? So, this is a place we wouldn't even look at in the United States to collect fossil plants because it's all cobbles, it's all conglomerate. But in between are these little mud lenses, and they're sopping wet. So we had to do all this stuff to keep the stuff from becoming mold and drying out catastrophically. But you do that and you get some fossils. Here's another site that we literally found just out driving around, tired at the end of the day, as always. It's sort of this site might even be a condo by now. I don't even know. I hope not. We're looking into that now. But it's a big mudlands, and it's just jam-packed full of mud. It's so soft you can cut it with a penknife. Unlike, remember how we had to use a jackhammer in Patagonia? And here you could like use your car keys and collect fossils. So here they are, and you look at that, you say, is this something I can even work with? But we collected as much as we could from this site as well. And we collected pollen from the same rocks, and Dave Shaw did the pollen work. And the pollen floor is really nice, very, very rich. So sort of in brief, it tells us that one site is a fern swamp and the other is a mangrove swamp. And you kind of scan for your favorite taxa. We got lots and lots of ferns, lots of tropical groups of ferns, really fun, and lycopods, Selaginella. We're getting like all the mangrove groups there, bunch of tropical trees, but sort of what stands out, and it helps give us the age too, which was about 5 million years for both of these sites. But what really stands out is that there are hardly any dipterocarps. I had to ask Dave to look at the slides again. It's like, where are these things? So this is dipterocarp pollen. So he had done a scan of, I think, 300 pollen grains, and there weren't any. So could you please look again? And he found like two grains of dipterocarps. And this is normal for the Malay archipelago. You think there's got to be dipterocarps 5 million years ago. How can there not be? But there's the story, right? So we're getting all this other information. So this is why we need different kinds of fossils. We have to put together the story from wood and pollen. Okay, so in the flora, we got about 25 species, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you like, about 60% of the material is not identifiable, even in the lab. But in contrast to the pollen, sort of the punchline is that dipterocarps are dominant at both of these sites. Especially Dryobalanops, got 87 leaves of Dryobalanops. In the same rocks, the pollen is almost non-existent. So this is actually the first fossil demonstration of dipterocarp dominance in the Malay archipelago, where these trees are so important. And we have some other significant records here, so I'm just going to go through these. So here's a dipterocarp. This is all published now, open access. Plus, you could download all of our pictures of the fossils, 76 gigabytes of them. Please, whatever you could do with that, please let me know. So you can see like the really thick midvein, the folded blades. It's this corrugated look. This plicate type of leaf is very, very typical of dipterocarps, and the thick midvein. This is photographed with low angle lights. You can see how the leaf is really folded, and the details of the venation are in the thick petiole. This is a dipterocarpus. Here's a second dipterocarpus. This is just a piece of a huge leaf, but compare it to this dipterocarpus humoratus. This is an herbarium sheet. Look how big this leaf is. This is one herbarium sheet. It's blown up here. And look how the venation is the same. It even has the little hairs on it, the little hair bases. So this is another dipterocarpus. These are the biggest leaves that we found. We only found pieces of them. But this is a tree. Remember what this is. So these modern analogs are threatened Borneo endemics, and they're 50 meters tall. So this little scrap of leaf, that's what it's telling us about. Here's Dryobalanops. This is a really distinctive one. It has these little tiny quadrangular fine vein fields, among many other features that you can look at here. So these are the first macrofossils that aren't wood of this genus ever. And the most similar species here, we can make these comparisons because these fossils are not so old. They could even be living species. It's a Dipterocarpus fusca, which is critically endangered Borneo endemic. So it's a little reassuring that these fossils, when we can identify them, actually do correspond pretty well to the flora that's there today. So we're not too far off. So this is a fun one. This is the shoria fruit. But when we found it looked like this, just the wings sticking out. Here's a whole shoria fruit with the 3 big wings and the 2 little wings. And this is still during COVID. I brought this back to I was able to get into my office, and I got an air compressor specially loaned to my office because I couldn't get into my lab that month, and for whatever reasons. And so I had a Sears air compressor and my air needles, and I prepped it all out. So I got this. So we got the big wing, and then we got the nut, and we got another big wing that's broken. And you can really see like the wings are pressed to the nut. They're coming down on it, and then the nut just kind of breaks off because it just doesn't preserve there. You can see the relief there that the wing is actually coming down over the nut. Now, this kind of fossil is really rare, and in the Malay archipelago, nothing like this has been published recently. So by recently, I mean in like 130 years. So, however, which dipterocarp is this? So sort of obviously, it looks like, well, 2-winged, and it's Hopia, right? And then if you know dipterocarps. But we have a bunch of fragments of dipterocarp wings from the site too, and Xiaoyu had sort of figured out that those were shoria. So anyway, but for it to be shoria, you need more wings. So I thought, I'll bet this is a shoria, and there are more wings. So we handed it off to CT, and sure enough, there's a whole wing in the sediment. So it's this dark one. You can spin it around. So this is not Hopia, and it is shoria. And this is sort of an example of the lengths we go to. So it's a shoria fruit. That's great. The 3 large outer wings are preserved. The 2 reduced inner wings are not preserved. So these are the first non-wood macrofossils of the genus in Malay archipelago. So this goes to show you that what you do find is going to be really new and novel. And that's a thrill, right? We've been doing that in Argentina for quite a while. And here, even more so, everything is just new. So we have the first melastomes from Asia. Here they are. So the 5 perfect ectodermis primaries. Here's a modern Ternandra. Ladder-like transverse veins. If you've done tropical botany, these are the one plant family you can spot from like 100 meters away. Just have these really prominent arching primary veins. So there we go, an important understory group. We have the first reliable fossil record from the Malay archipelago. And same thing for Ziziphus. So Ziziphus turns out to have a big hotspot of diversity in Borneo. There are 13 species there. And we have a couple of fossils. You can see the little cellulate margin and the beautiful preservation of the higher order venation. Got really lucky there. And here's a modern Ziziphus kunstleri, which is a near threatened liana. So you can actually make a reasonable interpretation that this is a liana, because it turns out that above a certain size, it's below a certain size, which I can't remember, 19 centimeters leaf length. All the Ziziphus in Borneo are lianas, and above that size, they're trees. So possibly a liana. So we're getting, between the pollen and the leaves and the fruits, we're really getting a picture of the vegetation, because we're going all the way up from the freshwater algae to the lagophytes and the fungi and the ferns, up to the trees. And then we're starting to get a glimpse of possible lianas and climbing plants too, like this one. So this was one of the mysteries we got at the very, very end, because this really doesn't look like much of a fossil. So we just kind of stared at it, we considered it indeterminate. And then we're just having a conversation about these little holes and whether this could be insect damage, right? Because that's another big thing of mine. And but they can't be, right? Because they're too regular. If these were insect instars, they would change in size, and there wouldn't be two rows that are exactly the same. It's like synchronized insect swimming. That just doesn't happen. But if it was bud feeding, it would go this way. And we're able to confirm that on our variant sheets that bud feeding in monocots, would be lateral. So we figured out this was a monocot because the venation has this big costa, these big lateral veins, and this kind of reticulate finer veins. And then we just bit the bullet and realized that these are just perforations like you would see in a monstera, right? And here's Rebecca's line drawing, so you can really see the perforations. And if you know the Araceae, the monsteroid Araceae have quite a few genera that have these perforations, and one of them is Rhaphidophora, which is a climber, very diverse in Borneo today, Sumatra, Peninsular Malaysia. So by elimination, there's really nothing else like this. If this is Araceae, it is Rhaphidophora. So it's the first fossil ever of that important climbing genus. So the summary of the Brunei leg. So we did Argentina and Brunei so far. So we have two new Neogean plant macrofossil sites. The first from the country, the first modern localized study of Cenozoic macrofloras from the Malay Archipelago. So you guys, you're all academics. You can see the conclusions. And botanists for that matter. We could interpret that the structure, composition, paleo environment in northern Borneo, coastal lowland forests have changed little for 4 or 5 million years. So we're actually demonstrating this for the first time. So it raises the conservation significance of the threatened modern analogs. The dipterocarps are really dominant, 79% of specimens. This is the first demonstration of ancient dipterocarp dominance, really the very first one done in a modern way. And then we have several other significant occurrences. So as I mentioned, I joined the Global Tree Specialist Group at the invitation of Sarah Oldfield. So I'm the only paleobotanist so far. And so now I have to figure out what I'm going to do. So I think this Brunei paper is what I can do, right? I can show a whole endangered ecosystem with a past. So if we're going to go back to the Gondwana story, I'm going to introduce my Australian colleague, Rob Koyman. I've worked closely with on Australian analogs for Argentina for many years. Here we are in Borneo. And never mind this plot, we put together a compilation in 2014 of 87 survivor genera from the Paleo-Antarctic. This is going back to Gondwana again. From New Zealand, Antarctica, Australia, and Patagonia. We did it with, I think, 13 collaborators. We put together a data set of 396 fossil rainforest genera from 62 Gondwana rainforest sites. So the record is actually really rich. And we're waiting for more people to use this. This is all posted in the supplement, and it's a really great resource for Gondwana history. So if you ordinate these Gondwana genera, you find that Australia through time has had the most similarity to Papua New Guinea, New Caledonia, Mount Kinabalu, and Fiji. Antarctica really lost out early. Patagonia and New Zealand have really been losing the old Gondwanan taxa. So that's what this is showing. We've had extinction of the old Gondwana biome here, but here's the Australia life raft that I mentioned at the beginning. And Australia is still showing that similarity in terms of Gondwana survivor genera to New Guinea, Kinabalu. So these are places with a lot of Gondwana survivor genera, especially the ones that are in wet forests. So this becomes a really interesting conservation tool. So when the bushfires hit Australia a couple of years ago, one of the places that got hit hard was the Gondwana rainforest region along the borderlands of New South Wales and Queensland. So we were able to write, so over about half of this forest was affected. And this has really, really rare plants. And it's sort of, walking through this forest is as close as you can get to walking through Antarctica 40 million years ago, sort of the simple way of putting it. So we're able to write about this. We're able to draw on our compilation of Gondwana plants and put some numbers on this and make the point in this letter to Science that the bushfires are threatening like real evolutionary living history. Which is an important thing. Education, conservation, and just preserving our links to deep time. So I started talking at a meeting not too long ago to Sarah Oldfield, OBE, she's the vice chair of the Global Tree Assessment. I think she's the director of Botanic Gardens International, or recently was. So she's the leader of this. So she put together the State of the World's Trees. I was pretty pleased that this piece, Ancient Tree Survivors, was put on page 11, like really up front. It's one of the most interesting things about tree conservation is that you can conserve ancient plants. So this is very satisfying to see this kind of message actually getting into the conservation community and getting out of it's not just paleontologists yelling anymore. Like real conservationists are getting the message now, and I can't even begin to tell you how satisfying that is, because I feel it. You can hear me talking about it, but people who aren't paleontologists are, they get it. So Sarah made sure that the Global Tree Assessment, after she talked to me, said, let's make sure we assess a lot of those things. So she pulled the strings, and the preliminary, it looked at those 87 genera that come from ancient Antarctica. And this preliminary number, 29% of the species are threatened with extinction. So something came out of that, and more is going to come out of it soon. So that's really neat. And then, we keep pushing this paleoconservation thing. So here in my department, my colleague Sarah Ivory is a fantastic palynologist, and she also does a lot of species distribution models. And she's mostly worked with the Paleo-African rainforest. Future modeling that. So I think you've got to do this with us. So you've got to feature model some of our ancient Gondwana stuff. So she brought in Adam, who's Adam Benfield, as her graduate student. So we put together this paper, Gondwanan survivor lineages in the high-risk biogeography of Anthropocene Southeast Asia. What a mouthful. So we took 4 of these Gondwana surviving genera, and Sarah and Adam mapped their GBIF occurrences, which are the dark, their full potential range, which includes places where they don't live, in gray, and where they could live, where they would end up possibly living under business as usual emissions. And of course, under business as usual emissions, these ancient trees, for the most part, these are genera, these aren't even the individual species, don't do so well. The available habitat shrinks considerably. So we lose all the lowland agathos, right? We lose immense parts of the range of Dacrycarpus. Gymnostoma is gone from entire parts of its range under this scenario. Castinopsis as a genus does really well, but this is almost like, of course it does, because there are over 130 species of Castinopsis. If you looked at some of the individual threatened species, I'm sure this would not be true, but this kind of illustrates that as a genus, Castinopsis will survive. But even as a genus, Gymnostoma might get really restricted. Dacrycarpus could get really restricted, Agathis could get really restricted. And then you match up the yellow, which is their potential refuge, to their modern range, and you see that they can't even get there, right? Because this point I made at the very beginning, that the Malay archipelago is a bunch of islands. The crisis is hitting at a high standing sea level. So it's making it that much worse. Some of the refuges are in Australia, they're not gonna go there, right? Or they're in northern Thailand. Some of these things are just not going to go there. So the protected ranges are often in de facto inaccessible areas due to forest clearing and marine dispersal barriers. So traditional biogeography always looks at full oceanic barriers, but in the Anthropocene, shallow water is enough of a barrier. I mean, these plants aren't going to walk across salt water just because it's shallow. So we have to think about an Anthropocene biogeography. So that's something we call for in this paper. And again, we have this incredible juxtaposition, right? Where you have 100 million years of survival for some of these plants and then extinct in 100 years. So that's something the fossil record can really tell us about. Okay, so finally, maybe we have this problem with fossil leaves. most of our fossils are fossil leaves, and they're very hard to identify. They're not attached to flowers. They're not attached to fruits. They don't have cuticles most of the time. So we can dig up quarries like this one in Argentina. You can find 50 kinds of leaves, and then what do? You know, what manual do you look at? Yeah, what's your guide for this? So traditionally, we wait to find fruits and seeds and those sorts of things to help us with this. So we're trying to improve those methods. So one thing we did, which, and this took 15 years, and I'm going to summarize it in 1 minute, is timescale shift again. We've just put online an image data set of over 30,000 cleared X-rated fossil leaves, vetted to plant family. And we've put it on Figshare. You can download it, unzip it, and just look at it in Windows. And it's searchable, and it's harmonized, and it's available to all of you. Just go to this website and click on the link, and you can have the fruits of labor of decades of curators, past and present, collecting and photographing cleared leaves, X-rayed leaves, and fossil leaves. So here's just one example of what you can find in here. Is this beautiful Scott Wing X-ray of this Malmia leaf. Here's some more examples of fossil and living, or living and fossil, cleared leaf, modern leaf, cleared leaf, modern leaf. So these are, a lot of these are old collections, and we're just vastly increasing their accessibility. Here's what they are on the left. We've standardized the file names across all these collections. It's been an immense databasing effort because we've just been drowning in legacy data for 15 years trying to do this. But here they are. You can now just, with a single click, you can download the whole thing from Figshare, 77 gigs of images, or you can do one of the subparts, 20 gig subparts of 30,000 leaves. So we want this to be a tool that you all use for teaching and for identifying fossils, and so that we can all learn more about leaf architecture. It's an incredibly complex thing that we know very little about. So sort of another initiative we're doing is we're trying to do a fossil version of PlantNet so that you can identify leaves using, you can have an assistant to help you identify leaves. So here's where we've been collaborating with Tomas Sayre's lab at Brown, and Ivan Rodriguez, who's a grad student there. I'm going to turn up the sound, it's a little soft. He's going to tell you a little bit about how we're using synthetic fossils to deal with the lack of training data from real fossils.
You have some facts where you can put your face and then another face appear like you already do. Well, we developed a method to do the same thing with leaves. So we put as an input one of the same samples is required. And then I can actually use the fossil example. We do this because finding real fossils is actually pretty hard, and we don't have so many of them. In order to increase the chances to get more fossils, we learn how to make this mapping between an X leaf and a fossil. It's basically telling us how it's going to look in a couple of million years. And with that, we are able to populate that data. We do this by using a cycle GAN, which allows us to go from this X leaf domain to a fossil domain, then back to a leaf domain. A result suggests that we are able to improve the accuracy of our classifiers by introducing these into the fossil. For example, in a normal 70-30 split for real fossils, we're still able to outperform the classification when we introduce these fossils, so that were created by GAN, by at least 2%. If in the case where we don't provide any fossil for one of the classes, and then we test in all the fossils for that classes, even though we're just providing GAN fossils, we still do much better than when we don't provide GAN fossils. As we can see here at the top 5, accuracy we get several times higher than chance probably to do it right, and we were able to create then an embedding that is showing us that as we provide the GAN fossils, the algorithm is good at least in the top 5 having the real name of the class. Here the confusion matrix, we show some of these performance in the top 5. What we see is fairly good when we provide GANs. In order to understand what the classifier is looking at, we developed this method called explainability methods that are able to tell us what part in the image is more important to classify one class as such. With these methods, we're able to not only understand what the classifier is doing, but also learn what the techniques that we should be using to increase our understanding in taxonomy. We have developed this website where you will be able to upload your images, your fossil images, and it's going to provide you some predictions. You can also crop the image because sometimes these fossil images are noisy. And then you hit the classify button, and it's going to give you the prediction for the class that you submitted. It's going to give you the top 5 families, and it's going to give you some confidence for each one of them. As well as going to provide you with some possible closest samples in the fossils domain to your sample. We are also working to have extend NEBS, but that's going to be a next iteration. And as well, it's going to give you the explainability maps using saliency method of RADCAM, which basically allows you to see what are the parts in the images that are most important for this classification to happen. So, for example, we know here some part of the indentation, and here some part of the venation is very important for this decision.
Okay, I hope you're able to hear that. If not, we can talk about it afterwards. But an app that will give you a family classification of your fossils is on the way. That's pretty exciting. So today's highlights: fossils from diverse source areas and computer vision are being used to unlock biogeographic history of Southeast Asia's imperiled rainforests and to promote paleo-informed conservation in Earth's most endangered region. And when I told you we get to the top of Kinabalu, here we are. At sunset, you're at the top of Mount Kinabalu. So you walked up the mountain. Project's underway in Patagonia. And that's the most developed area. So our project there has produced over 150 papers by the whole team over 20 years. And there's actually a Patagonia Paleofloras project Google Scholar page, and you can see all of them there. This also encompasses fossils in Australia and India, which those have not really begun yet because of COVID. Pakistan, Indonesia, Brunei, and Vietnam, those have begun. And the virtual paleobotany assistant app to ID fossil leaves is in development. The Brunei special feature showed you that dipterocarp dominated rainforests are ancient. They were in Borneo by the Pliocene. As well, there were several other significant new records. So this is a path forward for Asian wet tropics paleobotany, because there really hasn't been any in a very long time, and it's very hard to do. But I think we've shown a way where you can work with really difficult fossils and still get this information from them. And we're taking a paleo red list approach and future modeling approaches to spotlight the high-risk biogeography of Southeast Asia in the modern era and the significance of Asia's living fossil heritage. And I'm firmly convinced that the more the public is aware of fossil heritage, the more motivation there is to conserve what they have now. I think paleoconservation is a very, very powerful tool where I wouldn't be doing this, because people need fossils. And here's the deep time hall, the first when the public came in, right? So every fossil here has stories like the one I've been telling you for 2 hours, a different time, a different place, a different climate. Every one is important and is really telling you something. So people need fossils. And what proves that to me is my students. Each one of these is a picture of one of my students, usually having their first or one of their first encounters with a real fossil. And you can just see the smiles of, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like seeing a bunch of undergrads splitting rocks and finding leaves that are from moments after the dinosaurs died. And just seeing that connection with the past and touching it and finding it for yourself. You find your own ammonite, find your own fossil plant, and it just becomes so much more real. So this is the last slide. Thank you in several languages, representing some of the places we worked. And thanks especially to all the people I haven't mentioned. They live in these little villages all around the world and work at brick factories in Vietnam. So on New Year's Eve, 2019, we found fossils in this wall of clay here. What are you going to do about that, though? But it was right behind a brick factory, and there was one guy still working there on New Year's Eve. And he said, "Oh, I'll give you a second." And he came out with a backhoe and got all these rocks out for us. And that's why we have 570 leads from Vietnam. It's because of this guy. So thanks to our friends all over the world.
All right, thank you very much. It was great, and a really nice whirlwind tour of paleobotany in the fields across a number of really cool regions. I was just going to lead off sort of stepping back, there's this long-running sort of conversation in ecology and sort of shallow paleoecology about sort of the reality of communities and whether sort of communities are a thing, or whether what we see as communities today are just these sort of very fluid groups of species that just happen to be together for a brief period of time and then move in different directions. And I'm wondering, from your work looking over these very deep timescales, what your sense or intuition is about, like, sort of what communities are and these assemblages of species that are migrating and moving together. Do you think of them as sort of those groups of species as a real thing, or is it just sort of random patterns of species moving and ending up in the same places?
I think a little bit of neither. So yeah, it is really tempting. I mean, it's incredible to walk on Kinabalu or like Eastern Australia and see the same genera that you were digging in Patagonia a few weeks earlier as living trees. And it's pretty tempting to adopt this this Clementsian view that this is some kind of earth flora that's moved together. But probably not. I mean, I think these plants evolved where they did because there was a very widespread climate that they were adapted to, and they have they've in the sense that it's easier to move than it is to adapt or to evolve very much. Physiological tolerances. They have these kind of hardwired physiological tolerances that require ever wet environments. And we really see that in the podocarps. That's where Tim Brodribb at UTAS has done this pioneering physiological work with an eye towards the fossil record on the water tolerance of podocarps. And he sort of quantified at a point where they're very fragile water transport mechanisms, which then, because they only have one vein per leaf, so that the special tissues like accessory transfusion tissue, where they cavitate. And this is why some of these podocarp genera like Acmopyle are just incredibly rare, critically endangered, because they're on these little cloud forest islands in places like Fiji, and trying to avoid cavitating. So this sort of gets brought home to you because we found the fossil Acmopyle, the only ones in South America, not published yet, but presented this at a bunch of meetings, and it has this tissue in it. It has the accessory transfusion tissue in it, which means that Acmopyle has always been afraid of drought. And so I think one way or another, these are plants that for the most part either absolutely require wet or really prefer it wet. And they stayed on the Australian life raft. Australia was wet for a very long time. The rainforest was preserved, it then became monsoonal, then became arid. But then Australia did a favor to these plants by pushing New Guinea out for them. And so they were able to go there. So I think because it makes sense in terms of individualistic dynamics, it's not necessary to explain a Clementsian sort of scenario. You don't need to invoke that. And then when we started to look really carefully, Sarah Ivory was doing this with that future modeling paper. If you look at all the potential ranges of something like Agathis in Southeast Asia, it's actually not filling up the whole range. And it turns out to be sort of marginalized. Like the antisperms actually have managed to kick it out of some of the habitats where it would like to be. And then you see this other genera a little bit, like Castanopsis, are a little bit better at adapting. And then you have sort of the extreme example of eucalyptus, which has this massive arid biome radiation. So it said, to heck with being a rainforest plant. I could do anything. So now you have eucalyptus growing in some of the driest places in the world. So I think you can look at each case and they're going to turn out to be just a really rich sort of kaleidoscope of evolutionary adaptations through time, with the result that some of them, because they have similar requirements, do still live together. And that really is fascinating.
Yeah. So we have a question here from Tim that just came in. And so he asks, sort of given the importance of New Guinea as a bridge between the Australian life raft and Southeast Asia, is there a good fossil record from that island? And are you planning to work there?
I'd love to work there. Fossils of the right age, really, the fossil deposits of the right age are not documented there. They're probably there. I mean, you're talking about a volcanic arc system and abducted ophiolite suites, so you would need something like a caldera lake, something kind of like Laguna de Lunco. But in a rainforest environment, it's really hard to find that.
Yeah.
And nothing like that has been identified, but fortunately the saving grace is pollen, and Bob Morley's work especially, and the fact that we know so much about the history of Southeast Asian vegetation is largely due to one person, Bob Morley, and several decades of palynological work. And what we see is that off of New Guinea, and not just Bob Morley, but mostly Bob Morley and a whole lot of other people, but what we see is that in the Malay archipelago, there is pollen of Dactycarpus, Dacrydium, Gymnostoma. You can actually see it moving west. So we can say pretty confidently that these plants were on New Guinea from the moment that it emerged. And remember, New Guinea started off skinny as a volcanic rock, and then it kept growing. So it's doubled, tripled, quadrupled, and as the mountains have gone up. But you can follow something like Dactycarpus, which has a really distinctive pollen type, that you can track it west from Australia and New Guinea. You can sort of see where it first appears in the Malay archipelago, and then in mainland Asia in the pollen record. And then sort of a stunning surprise is that our Chinese colleagues have found Dactycarpus in Southeast China. I forgot which province now, it's just sitting here, but they're stunning, amazing fossils with the cones. And that's, something like 13 million years ago, Dactycarpus had actually found its way there. So there's enough to connect the dots. It would be really great to have fossils in New Guinea, but in terms of macro fossils that are relevant to the story, we don't have them yet.
One thing I wanted to follow up on was the ordination or the PCA that you showed of the different floras, the fossil flora connecting with the extant flora. Mm-hmm. I think that was depicting, you'd said that many of the elements of the flora that was on Antarctica were lost, that took a big hit. What was the dynamic there that led those species not to escape along one of these routes? Was it just it separated earlier and there was no connection?
So the old Gondwanan plants are really, as soon as South America and Antarctica separate, beginning about 50 million years ago. I mean, geology is slow, everything takes a long time. But the old Gondwanan plants start to disappear from the Antarctic record, and by the end of the Eocene, by the early Oligocene, about 32 million years ago, it's glaciated. But the escape route is gone, so they can't go into South America. It's actually true in reverse. The South American plants can't escape into Antarctica either. So there's an arid biome to the north in Patagonia. There are a bunch of marine incursions. There's a seasonally dry climate. We know this from the phytoliths and the pollen. So the sort of Borneo-like rainforest, montane Borneo, not lowland Borneo, big difference, of course, goes extinct there, and there's no place for the plants to go. So that Southern Ocean barrier is working in both directions.
Yeah. And the other thing that I mean, it seemed like was a major thrust of what you were saying, but so it really is the case that you're looking at species that have these endemics that are still alive today. They've managed to survive through 40 or 50 million years of continental drift, plate tectonics, climate change, and there really is sort of a crisis emerging that many of them seem to be threatened with extinction in the next 100 years or next 200 years based on that modeling.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, there are dozens of papers trying to project the future of rainforests, but probably if things keep going the way they are, there won't be montane rainforests with old Gondwanan plants. In 100 years, they will be gone. And,
that is stunning.
But what's happening is that the resource is getting depleted. So as it's cheaper to clear the lowland forests, but if you're trying to survive, you start to move up slope and the costs increase. But from satellite data, we know that the clearing of the mountain forests in Southeast Asia has increased dramatically. And both the mean elevation of clearing and the mean slope that people are farming on and clearing on are increasing. And the amount, I can't remember the numbers just sitting here, but it's something amazing. It's something like a fourfold increase in montane forest loss in 20 years. And this translates into billions of grams, trillions of grams of carbon.
Mm-hmm. And the connections you've made with the BGCI group and Sarah Oldfield, have there been discussions about where there's potential for some of these endemics to be preserved in botanic gardens? Are there other regions of the world that have comparable climate that may not be connected, geographically to the areas where these endemics are still alive today, but they could potentially persist in botanic gardens or conservation collections in some sort of far-flung place, even if they are lost from these?
Absolutely. The National Tropical Botanical Garden in Hawaii is a great place to keep your endangered New Guinea trees. They do marvelously there. And there are many places around, but botanic gardens around the world are conserving all kinds of plants, and in glass houses in the temperate regions and outdoors in the tropics. So if you go to Bogor, to the Bogor Botanic Garden in Java, you'll see everything. There's a whole ancient grove of agathis and podocarps and Oricaria. There's lots of dipterocarps. They're all there. So the tropical botanic gardens are incredible. The Singapore Botanic Garden has, maybe some of you have been there. They have a plant evolution garden, and this is Singapore. It's enormous, and you go on a walk and you go through the history of plants. So you start with like little hot pools and crusts, and then the first spore pods and spore plants and like copsids, and they have like a little carboniferous forest there. And then you come out into the Mesozoic and the Cenozoic, and it's an entire hill covered with Oricarians and cycads. And then you're into angiosperms, and they have like Magnoliales. They're going systematically through the APG classification, sort of at grand scale. So that's a great place to see it. And then there's Singapore also has the Cloud Forest Dome, which is one of my absolute favorite botanic exhibits, but they've actually sort of recreated Kinabalu indoors. This is the kind of thing that gets done there. I wish this was everywhere. Yeah. But you actually go up a hill inside a glass dome, and you go to the top, and there's Dacrycarpus, and there's Nepenthes. So I'd say there's a lot is being done, but there's no substitute for saving this stuff in the wild. You can have every botanic garden in the world going all out, conserving old Gondwanan plants. Don't forget Mount Toma Botanic Garden in Australia, right? And the National Botanic Garden in Canberra have wonderful exhibits of this stuff. That's going to add up to like a millionth of the biomass of what we need to be seeing. However, it's better than nothing. For education, it's tremendous.
So one last thing I would ask, and then we can turn on folks' microphones and video and just have some informal chat. But you had mentioned early in your talk about the paper that is it Monica Carvalho had published last year about the sort of KT extinction and sort of the emergence of angiosperm-dominated tropical rainforests in South America. Is that something that is appearing to be a global pattern, or that paper was focused in on Colombia and the Amazon, but was that a sort of a global phenomena that 5 to 10 million years after the KT is when angiosperm-dominated rainforests emerge globally?
It's hard to say. I think there's so much. The data collection in Colombia is so outstanding. So this is something that Carlos Jaramillo has been leading at Strive for many years. He had an undergrad named Felipe de la Parra working on the pollen, going long back. So going through many pollen cores. A student named Mauricio Gutierrez, in his sort of near his hometown, found the first Cretaceous leaf flora from the neotropics, from the late Cretaceous. It was in a little tiny coal mine, and I think he kind of risked his life. He followed the miners down and was like picking plant fossils out of the sides of sort of these dangerous shafts, and collected 1,000 fossils, brought them to Panama. So we have like the 50,000 pollen grains, and then we have the Cerrejón coal mine, which is the largest strip mine in the world, has produced a lot of these records. There's the leaf records. that have been published, and the Bogota Formation outside Bogota has become another important tropical site. So the effort going into this is just incredible. And then there are vertebrates. So the Cerrejón site also produced Titanoboa, which you probably saw in the press as the largest snake ever found, and giant turtles. So I'd say the quality of the record there is sort of unparalleled for the tropics. There's nothing like that in Asia, in the Asian tropics. There's certainly nothing like that in the African tropics either. So the quality of the record in the neotropics is really the gold standard. Now we've done a lot of work in the Great Plains and in Patagonia too, on the KT. There's sort of another branch of our Patagonia project that looks at the KT boundary. Another former student of mine, Elena Stiles, published a really nice paper about quantifying the KT patterns in Patagonia. I guess the issue is that, you look at these angiosperm leaves, and as far as you can tell, the angiosperms are dominant all the way through. So does that mean they had high biomass in the Cretaceous? Maybe not. There might have been little shrubby things. There are a lot of conifers around too. Mm-hmm. In the Cretaceous in Patagonia, you have Araucarian conifers, you have podocarps, you have extinct conifer group called Chirolepidiaceae. So we don't have a lot of information there about whether the angiosperms were really dominant. And we don't have a tropical rainforest either. This is in the temperate zone. So I'd say our understanding of synchronizing the KT boundary directly with the dominance of angiosperm rainforests is this incredible work by Monica Carvalho, Carlos Jaramillo, and their 30 co-authors or so that came out in Science. So you can check my Twitter. I said it possibly the most important paleobotany paper ever written. Yeah. I really think it's true. So
yeah. No, I think that's where I saw that when that was published, that you had mentioned that, and we tracked it down and integrated it into some of the lectures.
That's my former advisor pride, and yeah. I've seen this unfolding for years. It's just an incredible paper. So
great.
We'll see whether the pattern holds.